Thank you for the opportunity to give this plenary talk, and thank you for coming to this virtual session. In this talk I want to reflect on the seminal work in our field on global modelling. There is a lot of work in this area, but because of their status in establishing the area, I'm going to concentrate on two books, World Dynamics and Limits to Growth. Both attracted huge sales and significant comment well beyond academia. Because of their roots in the Club of Rome, I'm going to refer to them here as the core studies, or cores. The foundation story for them is well known. In June 1970, Forrester was invited to attend a Club of Rome meeting in Bern to consider the predicament of mankind. On the Paris-Boston leg of his journey home, he sketched this stock flow diagram for the model, World 1. Club of Rome staff came over to MIT in July 1970 to see World 2. It looked like this. Notice we have here purely physical factors, natural resources, land area, and human activity, food ratio, quality of life, and their interacting. The World Dynamics cover has a key run of the model, and Forrester summarised the insight. We don't have the option to grow forever. Our only option is to choose our own limits or let nature choose them for us. Published in 1971, Ugo Bardi estimates more than 100,000 copies were sold. He calls it a remarkable result for a technical text, and there was much comment on the book. The Club of Rome supported a longer research project directed by Dennis Meadows. World 3 was created. Runs, broadly similar, message, the same. The book, The Limits to Growth, was published in 1972, aimed at the general public, translated into more than 30 languages. Sales, I've seen estimates between 30 and 37 million, and even more comment. Cores has big ideas. Systems, interconnections, behaviour modes endogenously created, limits. And limits is a shorthand that I'm going to use for that bundle of ideas. Why look at this now? Well, there are two things I want to reflect on here. First, that the contribution of cores to environmental thinking is not always understood, particularly by people who were not really around before the books appeared, and I include myself in that definition. I was just a schoolboy. And secondly, because the experience of cores colours our thinking of ourselves as a field. So here at the 2020 conference, I'd like to look at cores with 2020 vision. Here's part of my motivation and curiosity. I was at a European system dynamics workshop a few years ago, and a PhD student said to me, "But it's obvious that Earth has limits. Surely nobody ever really thought it didn't." Well, and I've realised then I'd heard similar things frequently before. Yes, of course human activity and physical factors are linked, people would say, and we all know you can't grow forever. It seems to me a strange superstition that we always knew that, and I use the word superstition deliberately. I will explain later. So let me talk now about how cores changed people's understanding of the world. I'm not going to try to give a complete account of the times, of the books, or of subsequent work. I'm going to give an impressionistic view, and I hope it gives a flavour. I want to describe how people thought when these ideas were not around, or when they're not accepted, how people reacted when encountering these ideas, and how these ideas became accepted today. Now, in some sense, these ideas were around. In the 7th century BCE, the Greek poet Hesiod recommended moderation in all things as means to a good life, which seems to me a bit about limits. Malthus warned us about growth, and Lenin, yes, him, said something like, everything is connected to everything else. But not everyone agreed. In the worldview without limits, generally there is little consideration of interaction of economic activity in the environment. The reinforcing loop of growth is exclusively good. Limits are irrelevant because they're non-existent or far off, or unknowable because susceptible to technical change. Often these assumptions were so obvious that they were never stated. Interestingly, it was when the cause work came along in response to that challenge that you sometimes see the assumptions stated most plainly. So we find economists who think there really aren't any pressing problems yet. British economist Wilfred Beckerman, who thinks there's no reason to suppose that economic growth cannot continue for another 2,500 years. American economist Robert Soloff, saying the world has been exhausting its exhaustible resources since the first caveman chipped a flint, and I imagine the process will go on for a long, long time. And that's because there is enough stuff around. MIT energy economist Maurice Edelman said minerals are inexhaustible and will never be depleted. A stream of investment creates additions to proven reserves. When he was specifically asked when will the world's supply of oil be exhausted, he replied, the basic answer is never. Instead, the key resource is strength of will, ideas, human imagination, freedom. Economist Julian Simon says, in the end, copper and oil come out of our minds. That's really where they are. George Gilder asks us to overcome the illusion that resources and capital are essentially things which can run out, rather than products of the human will and imagination, which in freedom are inexhaustible. So how long can we grow? How big can we get? Well, Julian Simon again says we now have in our hands the technology to feed, clothe and supply energy to an ever-growing population for the next 7 billion years. Carl Kaysen quotes Robert Soloff again and says that he has a calculation that shows that in terms of physical limits alone, the Earth could support a population at least 1,000 times the present one at the current US per capita income level. That would be 3.8 trillion people. Now, that may sound awful to us, quite hellish. Indeed, it reminds me of Marlowe's fallen angel, Mephistopheles, saying, hell hath no limits. But these people didn't think so, and it's easy, too easy, to think that these people are fools. No, what they have is a very different worldview, and we should be aware of what it is and how it works, because that worldview is around still today. That worldview says that growth is natural, it is destiny, it is human freedom. Limits are a matter of will and can be overcome. Markets will play an important role, technology will triumph. But another large element is that is what the past had looked like, what people were used to. Here is a long time series for human population. And look at economic output. Though, by the way, this doesn't say anything about how this wealth was created, who was hurt getting it, who had it, and who didn't. What these show is growth was normal. Then the cause work arrived. Of course, it didn't come out of nowhere. Rachel Carson had warned about complex interconnections, Paul Ehrlich about population growth, and the first Earth Day was in April 1970 with its own flag, and Walt Kelly saying we have met the enemy and he is us, which is an endogenous view. But the core studies came and generated serious and sometimes extremely acrimonious debate. There was resistance to the heresies, the worldview challenge that these books offered. Article in Science commented on the behavioural scientific content is virtually zero. The article in Nature was called Another Whiff of Doomsday. The article in The Economist was called Limits to Misconception and said the report represents the high watermark of an old-fashioned nonsense. Beckerman again in Oxford Economic Papers described both books as such a brazen, impudent piece of nonsense that nobody could possibly take it seriously. The New York Times referred to garbage in, garbage out. And we all know what William Nordhaus had to say. Finally, an example of impact and rejection. Here is US President Ronald Reagan in a 1983 speech saying, perhaps you remember a report published a few years back called The Limits to Growth. Name check. Unfortunately, he finished, there are no such things as limits to growth, because there are no limits on the human capacity for intelligence, imagination, and wonder. I said earlier there certainly was resistance to the heresies the cause offered, and that's a big word to use. What I have in mind is Thomas Henry Huxley speaking in support of Darwin's theory of evolution. He said it is the customary fate of new truths to begin as heresies. But of course the story does not end here. Cause ideas have gone forward, they've been absorbed. And they've been absorbed in two ways. The cause work has its own specific acknowledged reputation, but also it has triumphed in a more general way. Cause plays a key role in the modern reputation of our field. How often do you introduce yourself as a system dynamicist and have one say, oh, is that the Forrester stuff about the world ending in 2050? Ugo Bardi from the University of Florence says that there's a bizarre two-part myth about cause. First, that they made precise predictions about global population and magnesium prices and said that humanity was condemned to irresistible collapse, just ridiculous stuff. In other words, we were Cassandra, the Trojan princess cursed with perfect foresight, who was not believed. People thought she was mad. And second part of the myth, Bardi says, is that cause were received with instant and universal rejection. In other words, they were a badge of dishonour for the system dynamics field. Now, neither of these is a good look, and both are wrong. The books talk about modes of behaviour and alternative policies. They're a warning about what might happen if, not what will happen, whatever. And yes, there was criticism at the time. However, cause also had many supporting responses. In Bardi's opinion, many people have forgotten what these studies said and how much of what was in them was correct. But not everyone. For example, de Stuyger in The Age of Environmentalism says that cause have an important place in environmentalist thinking today, and Forrester's original model is the founding work of global modelling. And what is the reason for this positive reputation? Well, most of all, the work itself, but also because these people did not give up. To understand the reputation today, we need a sound grasp of how these very detailed responses and follow-up studies show that cause continue to be a sound basis for thinking about the development of the global system. The specific reputation continues, but cause ideas have also been absorbed in implicit ways. So on the first, de Stuyger sees world dynamics as critical, and Adam Rome's piece in Nature has limits to growth as one of 5 publications that made sustainability a public issue. Beyond that, there is general acceptance of the broad ideas, though no mention of cause as stuff. So Wackernagel et al. Discuss stocks and how the carrying capacity of the planet has been overshot. Lenton et al. Talk about tipping points in the Earth's climate system. Rockstrom et al. Propose planetary boundaries, 9 physical limits that humanity should stay within. Kate Raworth from Oxfam has a donut. The outer ring of those 9 physical dimensions of the environmental limits inside 11 elements of social foundations, making a safe and just space for humanity. This is a systems view with ideas of interactions and limits. Arguably, another consequence of the cause studies in terms of changing worldviews is the idea that the Earth is in a new geological epoch, which is the result of human activity, the Anthropocene. This is acceptance of a central cause idea that the physical world affects the human world and the human world affects the physical world. It's a move from an exogenous to an endogenous perspective. These ideas link back to and in many cases derive directly from cause. So today we increasingly question growth. We are aware that we are using up stuff, and these are huge shifts in worldview. We did not get here by accident. It was not easy. People used to think differently. It was, and still is, like a heresy. But Huxley went on to say how truths can become superstition. And this is my concern, that this has become perhaps our superstition, that people always knew the things that are in the cause studies. No. Cause was new and bold and brave. It took hard work and courage. So let's not be superstitious. Let's understand how new this stuff was. We should celebrate it, be proud of it. Our field helped shift the world. The second thing I'd like to reflect on is something a little more challenging about the effects that cause have on our field. And I have mixed feelings about them. Perhaps this is just me, but I think I'm not alone, because after 30 years in the field I've seen a complex bundle of reactions, in myself but in others, and the question I ask about cause is this the best thing that ever happened to us, or is it the worst? Why would I think that? Well, the cause stuff is high-level access, publicity, controversy, the most public exposure ever of system dynamics, attention from the most senior people we have ever engaged with. And it really depends on our reaction to that history. And again, bit of a warning, I'm going to be challenging. I'm going to focus a little bit on the negatives that I think I detect in the field sometimes. Sometimes we think we deserve to be listened to. We have this amazing technique. We're really clever. We understand things that other people do not. We should be running things, or at least people should listen to us seriously. Or we get a great sense of loss, like we've been cast out of Eden. We'll never be that important again. We are Cassandra, right, but no one listens to us. Now, at the risk of overstating things, there's almost a sense of grief that I sometimes see. Which inevitably brings us to the Kubler-Ross grief cycle, which is not a great model, though it is behaviour over time. What you need for the different stages is along the bottom, so perhaps what I was doing in section 1 was talking about information, and here in section 2 I'm now trying to offer emotional support. I feel your pain, but if I may, I'd like to try to offer some guidance and direction. The just world hypothesis is false. Life isn't fair. Yes, Jay was lucky, but as Pasteur said, fortune favours the prepared mind. And remember, we don't deserve anything at all, right? But we can work for a lot. So, my answer to the question at the beginning is that cause is both the best and the worst thing that happened to our field. It's the worst if it traps us into some of those modes of thinking I was talking about, but the best if it inspires us. By inspired, I mean, well, look at what actually happened 50 years ago with 2020 vision and draw your own lessons. I have a few of my own. Stop dreaming. Opportunities don't fall into your lap. Work to make them or make the best of them. Be modest in the sense of be aware that there are lots of clever techniques and clever people around. Don't presume superiority. Learn how to make the case for system dynamics and for you. But still aim high in the problems you tackle. Put the work in to gain the trust of clients and stakeholders, the media, the public. Do good modelling. We do have a very powerful approach here, so be sure you've done the best job you can, technically, conceptually. Communicate in appropriate ways. Different groups will need different types of explanations, and that's fine, and we need to learn how to do that, how to vary our methods of communication, and I think that's a particular issue for academics. And finally, binding it all together, as Jay said, have courage. Those are mine, but again, we all need to think of our own. Look at cause with 2020 vision, straight on, honestly, with no illusions and no myths. See again just how revolutionary these works were. Realise that we are all living in a post-world dynamics limits to growth world. We shouldn't take it for granted. That historical perspective is vital. And thinking about the experience, we shouldn't feel entitled or angry, shouldn't despair or get depressed. There are lessons to be got from that experience, useful lessons. And remember that it is worth it. Perhaps be a little inspired, because these system dynamics ideas helped form the opinions of millions of people. People who now see what a delicate, complex, interconnected, lovely, precious and fragile place we all live on. I think that's inspiring. Thank you very much for listening.